I'm looking at this from the perspective of the fishermen from the coast and the lakeside watching this broadcast, the farmers in Trans Nzoia and the largest central part of Kenya, and also the pastoralist community from the arid and semi-arid lands. Odinga, when he was a presidential candidate, dismissed calls for a reduction of the high cost of living. He said, stop backing, and he's on record for saying that. And suddenly it's important, and one of the big agendas for this talk, which he said must be addressed, which is the high cost of living. And this generally seems to be the trend amongst politicians with regards to when the shoe is on the other foot.
Yes.
I mean, how can we address this dichotomy, which clearly seems to be the trump card of Kenya's politicians?
First and most importantly is that we must get to a point of recognizing elections as the legitimate tools through which transfer of power happens, especially if we purport to live in a democracy. Because if we then want to undermine elections as tools through which power is transferred, then we better set up another system of government. But then, quickly, if I remind you the words of Winston Churchill, is that democracy is the worst form of government, save for all the others that have been tried. So that democracy, for all its imperfections, is the only tool through which the people can donate their mandate to the government of the day. That is why the people of Kenya, and you know, we have had a beautiful history, that the first time we got into multi-party elections, Matiba challenges the election of President Moi. But then when Matiba attempts to seek redress in courts, the court pronounces itself on the matter 24 months after elections. 24 months is a long time. The person in office as appointed ministers has done so much. In 1997, President Mwai Kibaki attempts to challenge the election of President Moi again. The court pronounces itself on the matter 12 months after election. So then the people of Kenya in 2010 say that this is a misnomer. How can we make our democracy better? And therefore, the people of Kenya set up the Supreme Court with only one original jurisdiction, that they should deal with any dispute in relating to the election to the office of the president whenever there is any. So that today, as we speak, and you say rightly that for the people watching us from the shores of Lake Victoria, where I happen to come from, and from the coast region and from the pastoralist community, that what is in it for them? The question of high cost of living is not entirely a responsibility of Kenya Kwanza government. There are external factors and there are also internal factors. So one of the internal factors is the question of debt. Because debt, therefore, as we have gotten to a point where the government is not having enough revenue to help it, you know, to have the headroom, to have money to spend locally. So that means that naturally there is a difficult fiscal space in the country. There is a disruption that has come, one with, of course, the recession that comes with the post-COVID era, and secondly, the disruption of the market by the ongoing war in Ukraine. So that some of these issues are, in my view, are not things that are going to be solved in the streets. But then, as a believer of the Constitution, I believe in Article 37, which says that peaceably and unarmed, people can go to the streets. But then, even as you exercise that political right, my question is, what is the political responsibility? I don't think it is politically responsible in the here and now to exercise that right, especially when it has potential of disrupting the local supply chain. My short answer to your question is, I think that because the two principals, the president and the former prime minister, had indicated that they are willing to talk, let that bipartisan talk not become an echo chamber, but let that team engage with honesty, in good faith, in the interest and benefit of the people. For instance, a question like the reconstitution of the IEBC, it may require conversation between both parties. But then, because we have had a precedent where the conversation has taken place and the agreements of those conversations have ended up being acts of parliament. For instance, in 2016, when we had Kiraitu Orengo team. In 2008, before we had the National Accord and the National Accord, there was the conversation that took place in Serena.
Okay.
And it is what was agreed at Serena that formed the bulk of the National Accord and Reconciliation Act. So let us not be afraid to dialogue. And I don't think that anyone should attempt to demonize this dialogue.
Yes.
Except that both parties must go to that table with absolute bona fides,
Okay.
good faith.